Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Today we are discussing my morning routine. Let's start with this amazing serum, Inchotras.
In Lagos, perfection is not something people discover, it is something they manufacture. Every morning begins with preparation, the perfect lighting, the perfect outfit, the perfect smile, the perfect caption. Because in a city where everyone is watching, perception can become more valuable than truth. Social media never asks how peaceful your home really is. It only asks whether the picture looks beautiful. And beauty has become a business. For millions of people scrolling through their phones, Naya's life looked like a dream. A successful influencer, a luxurious apartment, designer clothes, brand partnerships, a handsome husband, a marriage people admired. Women saved her videos, couples quoted her captions, young girls whispered, "One day I want a marriage like hers." But nobody ever wondered what happened after the camera stopped recording. Nobody asked what silence sounded like inside that expensive apartment. Nobody noticed that perfection always seemed to require another take. Arinze always returned the same way, never rushed, never nervous, never looking like a man carrying secrets. He walked through the front door with the confidence of someone who believed questions belonged to other people, not him. He carried himself carefully, like a man who had mastered the art of appearing innocent. His explanations were always simple. Traffic, late meetings, unexpected clients, that was his greatest gift. Not lying, but making lies sound reasonable. And reasonable lies are the hardest ones to expose because they leave no fingerprints. Women notice details long before they notice betrayal, a different perfume, a delayed smile, an unfamiliar confidence, a new password, things that seem too small to matter, until one day they fit together perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle you never wanted to solve. Love is strange. Sometimes it convinces you to ignore your own instincts. Not because your instincts are wrong, but because the truth is simply too expensive to believe. Some moments divide your life into two parts, before and after. For some people, it's a phone call. For others, an accident, a diagnosis, a goodbye. For Naya, it was one message from someone she'd never met. No greeting, no introduction, no explanation, only one sentence, cold, direct, impossible to unread. Not the only woman, not the only relationship, not even the only secret, the only wife. One word, 5 letters, enough to destroy an entire future. Her fingers suddenly felt heavier than they should. Her heartbeats became louder than the room around her. Because affairs are built on temptation. But marriage requires planning, commitment. You can accidentally fall into cheating. You cannot accidentally build another family. The photograph answered questions and created even more. The smile was unmistakable. The suit, the watch, even the way he tilted his head for cameras. It was him. There was no denying it anymore. The only thing Naya couldn't understand was how someone finds enough time to build an entirely different life while still pretending to belong completely to yours. Ironically, the invitation had arrived weeks earlier, a celebration of love, marriage, commitment, everything her own marriage had quietly stopped becoming. The cameras couldn't see that. They only captured beautiful angles, perfect smiles, expensive clothes, carefully rehearsed happiness. As photographers called their names, Naya smiled exactly the way everyone expected. Not because she wanted to, because she had forgotten how not to. Nobody noticed her hands trembling around the glass she held. Nobody noticed how forced every smile had become. Because public happiness is strangely selfish. It celebrates appearances, not reality. Not every secret lives in darkness. Some secrets live in ordinary houses, on ordinary streets, behind ordinary gates, places nobody thinks to search. This house wasn't luxurious, it wasn't flashy, it didn't need to be, it only needed to remain invisible. Inside, another woman waited, not impatiently, not hopefully, simply patiently. As though waiting had become part of her identity, she knew his routines, his schedules, his disappearances. She had learned not to ask questions that would never receive honest answers. Because eventually, silence becomes easier than disappointment. Every story has someone who believes they're the exception. Rayma believed she was different. She believed she was the woman who would eventually become the only woman. Attention has a dangerous way of feeling like love, especially when it's expensive. Lavish gifts, weekend trips, luxury dinners. She thought she was living a romance. She didn't realize she had been assigned a role. Men who build double lives rarely stop at two, because secrecy is addictive. Every successful lie creates confidence for the next one, and every woman believed she was seeing the real version of Arinzi. None of them realized they were each holding only one small piece of a man who had spent years dividing himself into different lives. Naya had spent weeks convincing herself that she was overthinking. Eventually, they become impossible to ignore. That was what brought her to Keo. He wasn't famous, he wasn't wealthy, he wasn't even someone people spoke about openly. He simply made a living finding the things powerful people hoped would remain invisible. He didn't ask emotional questions. He didn't offer comforting words. He simply listened. He took notes. He wrote dates, names, locations, times. Then he quietly nodded. To him, this wasn't another heartbreaking marriage. It was another investigation. And investigations never begin with conclusions. They begin with patience. Then there was the child, a little girl laughing while holding Aaron's hand as though she'd done it 1,000 times before. Not awkward, not unfamiliar, comfortable, natural, like a father. Naya stared at the photograph longer than all the others, because children cannot fake belonging. A child always knows who feels like home. And in that single picture, everything changed. This was no affair, no mistake, no temporary distraction. This was another life, one that had been growing quietly, while hers slowly fell apart. By the time Keo placed the final photograph on the table, Naya wasn't searching for answers anymore. She was mourning a marriage she suddenly realized had disappeared long before she noticed it. Wisdom rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it lives inside people who have survived what others are only beginning to experience. Mara had seen women arrive exactly like this before. Beautiful, successful, educated, completely certain they knew the men they loved, until one day they didn't. She welcomed Naya without surprise, as though heartbreak had its own appointment book. The room was quiet, not awkward, just honest. For the first time in weeks, Naya didn't feel the need to pretend she was okay. That alone felt unfamiliar. Mara had learned something years earlier. Controlling men don't begin with violence, they begin with dependence. Until one morning, you can't remember who you were before they arrived. The prison is built so slowly, you mistake it for a home. Naya listened carefully, not because the words were comforting, because they were painfully familiar. She remembered every time she'd apologized for something that wasn't her fault, every dream she quietly abandoned, every friendship that slowly disappeared, every opinion she swallowed just to keep the peace. Looking back, none of it happened overnight. It happened one compromise at a time. That was the frightening part. For the first time since the message arrived, Naya wasn't thinking about revenge. She wasn't thinking about humiliation. She wasn't even thinking about Arinze. She was thinking about herself, about the woman she'd slowly stopped recognizing, and somewhere beneath the pain, something unexpected quietly returned. Strength. Some people collect wealth, others collect influence. Arinze collected admiration. He understood something many powerful people understand. Reputation is a currency. Once enough people believe you're a good man, the truth struggles to compete. That was why he loved gatherings, charity dinners, business events, fundraisers, places filled with cameras, places filled with important people, places where appearance mattered more than reality. There are entrances, and then there are arrivals. The woman who stepped into that room carried neither anger nor fear. She carried certainty. The children stayed close beside her, completely unaware that every adult in the room had stopped breathing. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Laughter disappeared. Eyes followed every step she took. Not because people understood what was happening, but because instinct told them something enormous had just entered the room. People often ask when someone reveals their true self. The truth is, they rarely reveal it. Circumstances reveal it for them, for years. Arinze had been admired for his patience, his kindness, his calm voice, his polished manners. But masks have one weakness. They are difficult to hold together once fear enters the room. The grip wasn't driven by love. It wasn't even driven by anger. It was driven by ownership. Ownership disguised as protection. Ownership disguised as marriage. Ownership disguised as responsibility. Naya suddenly realized something that terrified her. She had spent years trying to understand the man she married, without ever asking herself a different question. What if the man she married never truly existed? What if every anniversary, every vacation, every carefully written social media caption, every promise had simply been another layer of the performance? The thought settled heavily inside her. Not because it was new, because deep down, she had suspected it for much longer than she wanted to admit. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned, his shoulders relaxed, his smile reappeared, his voice became gentle again. It happened so naturally, it was almost frightening. That was the moment Naya finally understood. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing the story everyone believed about him. Because power built on reputation, can collapse the moment people stop applauding. Every betrayal creates invisible enemies. Women are taught to compete, to compare, to blame one another, to fight over a man who created the confusion himself. It is a pattern almost as old as betrayal itself. The wife blames the girlfriend blames the wife, the hidden woman blames both. Meanwhile, the man quietly watches from the center, untouched, protected by division, protected by silence, protected by the simple fact that people rarely expect women to stand together. But something different happened that night, something Arinze had never prepared for. The women looked at one another, really looked, beyond the anger, beyond the embarrassment, beyond the labels. And what they saw was pain, the same exhaustion, the same disappointment, the same unanswered questions, different lives, different stories, the same wound. No one needed to explain anything. The silence carried enough truth. Ife had spent years hidden. Rema had spent years believing promises that would never be kept. Naya had spent years defending a marriage that existed only in photographs. Each woman believed she had been chosen. Now they understood. None of them had been chosen. They had been managed, carefully separated, carefully controlled, like rooms inside the same house. Never allowed to meet, the greatest weapon controlling people possess is isolation. Because isolated people question themselves. United people question the person controlling them. And that changes everything. That was the exact moment. The balance of power shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a door unlocking. Arinze still believed he was controlling 3 different stories. He had no idea. Those stories had just become one. Fear asks only one question. How do I survive? Courage asks another. How do I make sure this never happens again? For the first time, the conversation wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about errands. It was about truth, because the truth has an unusual quality. Once enough people begin carrying it, it becomes impossible to bury. The table slowly filled with evidence, photographs, bank transfers, property records, phone logs, travel dates, marriage documents. This wasn't simply one dishonest husband, it was an entire system built on manipulation, money, influence, fear, silence, each protecting the other. The more they uncovered, the less surprised they became. Powerful people rarely depend on one lie. They depend on hundreds. Small lies, convenient lies, professional lies, personal lies, each one supporting the next, until eventually the entire life becomes impossible to separate from deception. Naya looked around the room. Hours earlier, these people had been strangers. Now, they were allies, not because they trusted one another completely, because they understood something greater. No single person could fight this alone, but together, they finally had something Arinze hadn't expected: witnesses, evidence, and time. That night, no one celebrated, no one claimed victory, because they all understood the same thing. The most dangerous moment is not when you discover the truth, it is when the person hiding it realizes. You finally know, and somewhere else in Lagos, without saying a single word, Arinze was already beginning to sense that something had changed. People shared screenshots without asking where they came from. Bloggers competed to break the story first. Comment sections filled with theories. Some believed every word. Others defended Arinze without hesitation. That is the strange thing about public scandal. The truth is never enough. Everyone wants to become part of it. Within hours, the perfect husband, the respected executive, the admired philanthropist, the man whose marriage inspired thousands, had become the center of a city-wide conversation. The image he spent years building was beginning to crack. Lagos has always loved stories, especially stories about powerful people falling. Not because people enjoy suffering, because influence often looks untouchable, until suddenly it isn't. Every neighborhood carried a different version of the story. For the first time in years, silence no longer belonged to the women, it belonged to him. The phone that usually brought admiration now delivered consequences. Every vibration reminded him. Control was slipping away. He wasn't frightened because strangers were talking. He was frightened because important people were listening. There is a difference. A scandal damages your image, but questions from powerful people can destroy your future. Arinze leaned back in his seat. His expression remained calm, too calm, the kind of calm that often appears just before someone decides to become dangerous. Some battles leave scars, others leave strength. The truth didn't erase their pain, but it gave them something they had lost, their freedom. They had been strangers, then rivals, then survivors, and in the end, they discovered that the strongest thing they could do was stand together, because no one deserves to live in the shadow of someone else's deception. Thank you so much for watching The Husband of Many Women. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more original African stories filled with suspense, drama, and unforgettable twists. And before you go, tell me in the comments, who touched your heart the most? Naya, Ife, or Rima? Until next time, thank you for watching and God bless.